Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Taylor. I'm a product marketer here at Normative. I'm originally from Seattle, but I've been in Copenhagen for the last 2.5 years and with Normative for almost 2 years. It's crazy how time flies. We really appreciate you coming to our webinar during the holiday season. We know things are busy, but we thought it would be super fun to look back at 2023 from every perspective under the sun. So we're going to look at some legislation, some technology. We're going to hear some qualitative data from a recent normative research project, and we are going to hear directly from a normative customer about the importance of this data. While we go, I always love to hear where everybody's calling in from. So if you want to add in the chat, where are you from? Who are you? Tell us a little bit. And we are just going to kick it off and get started. Before we dive into the content, just some quick housekeeping for today's webinar. We're going to aim for about 45 minutes of duration to respect your time. We will do a Q&A at the end. So that might be another 5 or 10 minutes at the end. Please do add questions. You can do that using the Q&A feature in the bottom right. That's the best way for us to keep track of the questions that are coming in and respond to every single one. We will record this webinar, so look for that in your inbox after today's session. And last but not least, we always are striving to create better webinars and content for you. So at the end of the webinar, if you stay on, we'll send a 1-minute survey. It should automatically redirect you. And that feedback that you share, it's super, super valuable for us to shape the content that we produce and make it more meaningful. So thank you in advance for staying on a little bit extra to help us make better content for you. And we have a really stacked agenda today. We have 4 speakers. It's my job to wrangle them and make sure we get to hear from everybody, but I am really excited to introduce all of these people. I'm going to let each speaker introduce themselves. And Jack, why don't we start off with you? Could you tell us who you are and a little bit of what you're going to cover today?
Thanks, Taylor. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jack Miles, and I'm a Senior Research Director at HarrisX. And earlier this year, me and my colleagues supported the Normative team on doing some research for their carbon accountability report. And we're going to take some time today to give you all a quick snapshot into some of the key takeouts from that.
Thank you so much, Jack. Then I get to hand it over to my colleague, Sarah, who's going to talk about product.
Thanks, Taylor. My name is Sarah, and I'm a product marketer here at Normative, and I'm tasked with translating the inner workings of our product into compelling stories that resonate with you guys, our audience. So I'm excited for my part later in today's session, where I'll talk you through the trends we saw in carbon accounting tech here in 2023 and where we see it heading in 2024.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And next, we are really delighted to welcome Oliver from a normative customer, Clearbank.
Hey guys, thank you for having me. Delighted to be here as well, Taylor. I'm Oliver Thornton, Head of Sustainability here at Clearbank in the UK, dialing in from London. Been with Clearbank for about 3 years now. And focus today is to talk a little bit about our sustainability strategy. 2023 has been a big year for us, and in particular focusing on the whole value chain and the importance of that and where Normative comes in to support us in doing it.
I'm really excited to hear all about that, Oliver. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, we have my colleague, Dr. Alexander Schmidt. Alex, would you please tell us a little bit about you and what you're going to share today?
Yes, thanks so much for having me. So I'm Alex. I'm heading Normative Science, Sustainability and Climate Research Department. In the capacity also just been to COP28, the big UN climate conference. And I want to share with you some insights into what happened in 2023 in the realm of regulation and legislation, and then also give you a bit of an outlook as to what to pay attention to in the upcoming 2024.
Thank you, Alex. Each of these speakers will do a little bit more intro to themselves when we get to their section, and I'm going to do a quick intro to Normative, just in case there's anyone on the call who hasn't heard too much about us yet. Actually, before that, we're going to do a poll. We're going to do a poll. Because this is a 2023 in retrospect webinar, what we're going to do is ask this question. Over the past year, what challenge or opportunity was at the top of your sustainability agenda? And that poll should now pop up on your screen, and we're going to wait just a moment to see the results. You can find it in the polls tab on the bottom right if it's at all difficult to find. Oh, I love the live voting. I will just wait about 10 more seconds as the poll comes in. And thanks for the introductions, everyone. It's really, really cool to see how you're from literally all over the world. Okay. So in our snapshot of this poll, what we see, 37% had upcoming legislation at the top of the agenda. About 25% have compliance. And then the next runner-up is employee engagement, which really tracks a bit to what we're talking about in this webinar. We're going to talk about legislation, and employee engagement is certainly top of mind for us at Normative as well. So continue to vote if you still haven't registered, but I am going to now do my quick introduction to Normative. At Normative, our mission is to make known and reduce the sustainability impact of all of the economic activities on the planet. We were founded in Stockholm in 2014, and sustainability is core to our practice. We have about 160 teammates based in Stockholm, Copenhagen, and London. Second, science is an inspiration for everything that we do, whether it's our partnerships, our product, or the collaborations that we choose to take on. And those are partnerships like the SME Climate Hub and Bankers for Net Zero. And finally, from a business perspective, our team comes from many different backgrounds. We've got everything from disruptive scale-ups like Pecan, as well as our wonderful colleagues from established businesses like SAP. And it's really the combination of all of that experience that makes Normative unique in our approach to carbon accounting. And whatever we're working on, we strive to make carbon visible, because we know that when carbon is visible for everyone, then that data can be used for all sorts of business and sustainability initiatives. When you can see carbon, you can reduce and lead to net zero. And that's, of course, Normative at the highest level, and my colleague Sarah will share a bit more about the product in just a few minutes. But that is plenty from me, and I am now delighted to hand over to Jack, who's going to talk a bit about our latest research into what the market's looking like. So Jack, please take it away.
Thanks, Taylor. Interesting to see the subjects of legislation and employee engagement come out and the poll, because they were, of course, topics which we have touched upon in our carbon accountability report. So, as I mentioned in the introductions, my name's Jack Miles from Harris X, and earlier this year, we worked with the Normative team on doing some research to help them create their first carbon accountability report. A quick overview of the research that we did. We surveyed 200 sustainability decision makers, all of whom worked in businesses with a minimum of 2,000 employees. These 200 people came from across 5 different European countries, and we surveyed them on a number of topics that ranged from kind of fairly broad, such as their commitment to ESG and the role of ESG in their business, down to the very specific nature of the carbon accounting that they do, the risks they have in their carbon accounting practices and the benefits of carbon accounting, and then arguably most interesting of all, what they see the future of carbon accounting being like. Once we had done a survey with 200 sustainability decision makers, we then went on to speak to 8 more of them in more detail via a qualitative interview to get a bit more depth and nuance to the survey responses. Suffice to say, across all of this, we uncovered a lot of insights, but among all the things that we found out, there was one kind of stream of insights that really stood out above the rest. And that was that there's scope to improve how businesses are measuring emissions from their supply chain. And that's really what I'd like to discuss with you all for the next 5 minutes or so. Just to start off, what became very clear from our research is that sustainability decision makers know that carbon accounting matters, and a number of data points support this. 96% of sustainability decision makers are committed to a formal carbon accounting process, and 83% have a dedicated carbon accounting department. But more interestingly, 71% of sustainability decision makers deem ESG factors crucial when they're choosing new suppliers. However, despite this high number of decision makers saying that they deem ESG an important factor when they're choosing suppliers, only 28% of the decision makers that we surveyed stated that they measure Scope 3 emissions. And as you can see from the chart on the right-hand side, that's significantly less compared to the amount we're measuring Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. But what's most important about this is how that 28% compares with the amount of emissions that are actually found in a business's supply chain, which is 88%. That's 7 times more carbon emissions that are found in the supply chain compared to Scope 1 and 2 combined. However, the question then is really, why are significantly less sustainability decision makers measuring their Scope 3 emissions compared to those who are measuring Scope 1? The answer partially lies in what sustainability decision makers are finding challenging with carbon accounting. What the data on this slide shows is the percentage of sustainability decision makers who find the various elements of carbon accounting challenging. And many of the areas that the decision makers find challenging are things that I think would impact their ability to measure emissions from across their supply chain. For example, complexity in tracking emissions across locations, inconsistent data collection methods, inaccurate data collection, and also incomplete data collection. The next question then is, why are sustainability decision makers finding these things in particular challenging? And I think we can infer the answer by looking at the methods of carbon accounting that some of them are using. What this data shows is the percentage of sustainability decision makers who are using the following methods of carbon accounting. 48% are using emission factors and manual calculations, 46% are using supplier or vendor reporting, but only 32% are using expert guidance. And I think it's when we look at the large usage of manual calculations and comparatively low usage of expert guidance, we shouldn't be surprised that sustainability decision makers are facing challenges with the complex world of measuring supply chain emissions. One thing that I don't think is holding sustainability decision makers back when it comes to measuring Scope 3 emissions is the lack of awareness on the topic and the amount of information available regarding Scope 3 emissions. And Google Trends supports this. What you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide are the global search volumes for the terms Scope 1 carbon, Scope 2 carbon, and Scope 3 carbon. And what you can see is that according to Google Trends, there's much more searching and kind of inquisitiveness happening around Scope 3 emissions versus Scope 1 and Scope 2. We can also tell by the most common queries related to Scope 3 emissions that people are looking into this area quite a lot, by the fact that some of the most used queries involve language such as, what are the biggest challenges when companies are committed to sustainability? What are Scope 3 emissions, and what are the Scope 3 emission categories? So clearly there's scope to improve how businesses measure emissions from their supply chains, and there's an interest in trying to find out how they can do so. There's also plenty of evidence to suggest that sustainability decision makers want to make these improvements, and we can understand this in a couple of ways. One is by looking at the value sustainability decision makers place on ESG and the value that businesses place on ESG. 93% of sustainability decision makers state that ESG and carbon accounting will become moderately or significantly more important to their business in the next 3 years. 91% state that their business is actively trying to reduce their environmental impact. And 55% state that they recognise that reducing their environmental impact is one of the biggest reputational factors for their business. But more tellingly is how decision makers want to see their carbon accounting methods improve in the next few years. We asked sustainability decision makers 2 different questions. One, what is the most desired set of carbon accounting improvements they'd like to see in the next 3 years? And also, what are the carbon accounting measurement and reporting features that they'd most like to see in the next 3 years? And their answers all really touch upon things that give them a greater ability to understand and measure Scope 3 emissions. In terms of the improvements, the most common things people were requesting was greater integration with supply chain data, increased automation and AI in data collection and analysis, and an enhanced focus on Scope 3 emissions tracking. And in terms of the specific features, the ones that sustainability decision makers were calling for the most was improved visibility into emissions across their supply chain, integrated data collection, and an enhanced understanding of emission sources. And all of these things, as I said a moment ago, all touch upon that sustainability decision makers want to have a greater ability to measure and understand emissions from within their supply chain. Now, that was just a very, very small snapshot of what is included in the Carbon Accountability Report. Unfortunately, we probably need the whole of the webinar to take you through the full detail. And if you want to know more about the Carbon Accountability Report, the topics that I've just discussed, and some topics beyond that, you can find it on the Normative website just here. And I think, Taylor, shall I now hand back to you?
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Jack. That was really, really wonderful. And I think if you tempt everyone with an entire webinar on that report, they will demand an entire webinar on that report. So let's be careful what we wish for. I am now really delighted to hand this over to Sarah, who I think is going to talk about how a lot of the themes in the report are reflected in what we've been investing in on a product side. Take it away, Sarah.
Exactly. So that sets the stage perfectly for me to say or talk about how we saw these trends emerge in the technology that sets out to tackle these very challenges that businesses are facing. So first up, we saw a big trend is data. It's a surprise to nobody that we have more data than ever in today's digital age, but data doesn't do us any good if it's just sitting somewhere. So data is increasing exponentially, but how can we harness businesses' data into carbon calculations accurately and efficiently? So for Normative, that looked like launching earlier in the year our customer-facing API program that makes it possible for organizations to automate the process of collecting and uploading data from their systems directly into our platform. It also meant reducing the effort on data collection and automating, no matter what our customer's business setup looked like. So with updates like guided data correction, users get instant feedback on data uploads so they can get to their calculations faster. We also know that in large organizations, data can sit in different places or with different teams. So another feature we came out with this year allowed for customers to set custom permissions and privileges for data to ensure data visibility where needed and to keep sensitive data secure. Reporting and compliance, well, my colleague, Dr. Alex Schmidt, will go into this in more detail later. Increased talk of climate legislation globally drove a really strong trend across markets on the platforms of adding reporting features. So while we can't predict the future of compliance, the saying goes, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And if you have accurate carbon calculations you can trust, your business can be prepared. That being said, we did come out with some features to help companies in their goal to be compliant and meet their reporting needs. One of these was one-click reporting. So this provides a guided flow to confirm that the framework is something that is relevant to your business and then be able to give you in a compliant format the pertinent carbon reporting data. Another thing that we heard from customers was the transparency into their calculations. So with our improved activity view, gone are the days of the black box of carbon calculations. Users want to be part of the process of what goes into calculating their carbon data, and they know their data best. So this activity view gives you the transparency to see your data, the corresponding categorization, and edit based on your firsthand knowledge of this data. The last of the big trends you heard also by Jack was this engaging your value chains. So in 2023, we saw a huge shift in focus to Scope 3 in order to action reduction efforts, but engaging value chains is much easier said than done. So part of the challenges is that business have to look outside of themselves to engage their Scope 3, and that's what also makes it a challenge from a platform perspective as well. Now, I might be biased, but one of the most exciting normative releases this year was our Engage module. And with this module, allows you to collect supplier data. So businesses were able to take their top emitting suppliers based on their carbon baselines and collect primary carbon data in a greenhouse gas protocol aligned format, all within the normative platform. Now, once they have that data, they'll be able to engage suppliers in reductions with the tools to examine which suppliers have the highest potential for reductions and collaborate to reduce. We're also able to take that primary supplier data and directly apply it to a business's carbon calculations. So they're able to verify the impact of initiatives with suppliers over time and increase the granularity of their carbon calculations. If any of that is of interest to you, I urge you to check out our September webinar where we went into depth about this on our .com. Now, we cannot talk about 2023 without talking about AI. New technology that can further our mission of providing accurate and reliable carbon calculations is always of interest to us, but we also know that it holds unknown risks. And as part of our scientific governance structure, we at Normative carefully evaluate new solutions to ensure they meet our high standards of quality and security while maintaining alignment with global reporting frameworks like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So this is looking back, but what do we have coming down the pipeline in 2024? So looking at 2024, reduction will be the name of the game. Targets are being set, but the real work comes through reduction. We're confident in the insights that we can give our customers, but actioning those insights into real reduction will be what gets businesses to net zero. Now, how are we going to help do that? We're going to continue to focus on data. It's not going to go anywhere. We'll be looking at how to continue making it easier and to import data and lower the threshold of getting carbon insights that are super responsive to businesses quicker. We also want to be able to slice and dice this data so business leaders can zero in on where to drive impactful reductions. And that will be a core theme in the first half of 2024. So make sure you're subscribed to our newsletters so you are the first to hear what we have coming down. And last but not least, the majority of emissions we all know sit in scope 3. So we can't talk about reduction without talking about collaboration with suppliers that make up these businesses' value chains. So climate action is a team sport, and we'll be working on features that will further facilitate collaboration between businesses and their suppliers in 2024. So stay tuned.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I am once again going to transition a wonderful chat on product. And we're going to transition over to Oliver, who is a Normative customer using our product right now to advance some of your sustainability initiatives. Oliver, please tell us a bit about everything you're working on.
Thanks, Taylor and Sarah. Engaging value chain, easier said than done, is very well said and absolutely what our experience is. But I'm happy to say that we're already rolling out that new engagement feature that you talk about. So we're looking at our top 50 suppliers by emissions, which is a massive step forward for us. But let me talk a little bit about ClearBank first. So we're a bank born in the cloud to liberate financial services. That's the marketing one-liner. But what does it mean? So we are the first new clearing bank in the UK for over 250 years. So we're innovating in this market. I think we're about 7 to 8 years old now, fully cloud native. And our core offering is essentially real-time deposit accounts and payments. So you can see here that we're really a B2B platform bank. So we provide the infrastructure and the access to scheme and with the regulatory licenses, etc., which allow a whole wide variety of financial institutions to offer banking products they wouldn't otherwise be able to offer. We are very much a digital bank. We don't offer any lending or investment products. And for those of you familiar with looking at emissions in financial services, that's really, really important to then where we then focus. So those features of our business model have been really key to shaping our sustainability strategy, which I'll talk you through briefly in a moment. And also in focusing where we work together with Normative to look at our value chain. That visibility of value chain is absolutely everything. So as I say, sustainability has been a big focus for us in 2023. It's one of a small handful of company-wide priorities, but I'm very transparent in saying that we're not mature in this space yet. We're towards the beginning of the journey, as are so many other companies. I think it's really healthy to talk about it in that way and make sure we learn from each other and share experiences. So I hope that some of our ambitions and some of our learnings so far are of use to you today, and I hope that I can learn from all of you as well in the Q&A and from the other presentations. So when we think about sustainability at ClearBank, The overarching principle is about authenticity. And I think this is so important for all of us creating sustainability strategies. They have to be authentic to the business, authentic to our culture, to our business model, and to our commercial strategy, really importantly. And that's to get the buy-in from leadership, but also from all of the people who work there, from our wider value chain, from our investors, etc. So with that in mind, we've distilled it down to sort of 3 themes that we can apply to our six pillars of sustainability that we've got here at ClearBank. So there's innovate, steward, and advocate. And they speak to our underlying culture and our business model. So we really pride ourselves on innovation. We're a disruptive digital entrant to the clearing market. It's defined within our core purpose that we are an innovator. And so it's really important that we harness that for sustainability. So when we look at the products we develop, the infrastructure we build, our contribution to industry knowledge, whatever it might be, having that angle of innovation and sustainability together is so important for us. And there's so much research on this, and I'm sure lots of you have come across as well. Consumers want sustainable products now. In financial world, consumers will accept lower returns for more sustainable products. If you look at pensions, etc. Sustainable products open up new markets. Sustainable run businesses are much more resilient to unexpected shocks, the kind of shocks that we know are coming down the track with the direction of travel for the world. And really key for us, other businesses are increasingly choosing more sustainable partners to do business with. And I think it came up right at the start of this presentation, this webinar, in the stats, attracting and retaining talent. So engagement with the workforce, this is becoming incredibly important, especially when you look at the generations who are coming through, and that's our future workforce. So I think these messages are really important to all of our boards and all of our leadership. It's not just about we're doing the right thing. It's also about there's an opportunity here for brand differentiation, for growth, and there's a commercial angle as well as a responsible business angle. So a good example of what we're working on at the moment in this space is an innovation around a carbon to serve module, as we call it. So very much like a cost to serve or a gross margin calculation. But what we're doing is calculating and on a unit per unit basis for every product and service that we offer. We want to get to a position where we know exactly what the emissions are for that item. And that's fantastic for us because as an innovation, it allows us to track down really quickly where we've got waste, which translates to cost and emissions. But also in the future, we hope to expose that to our clients and even underlying end consumers. So they know when they look at their upstream, which is of course their scope 3, where those emissions are falling and where they can do better. So the second big theme around stewardship, we've talked about this already around the value chain. As a digital bank, as I say, without lending or investments, the vast majority of our impact is really in our value chain and not massively within our control. So stewardship is a huge focus, and that's looking where our clients and suppliers maybe can do better. It's also learning from suppliers and customers who are doing really, really well. Sometimes it can feel like we're just one voice, and I know that from speaking with colleagues in the industry, people can feel like they're just one voice, but this is the importance of that collective stewardship of all of our value chains, because when you put those together and we start to build momentum, then collectively there are many voices talking to the same supplier, or there are many voices talking to the same client, and we start to see that change. And then for advocacy, I think this is a really important one for ClearBank because we have such an opportunity. We actually have an outsized voice for our market share, really. And that's partly because we're B2B, we have all of these financial services customers, but it's also because the market is watching our very rapid growth. So that brings with it an opportunity to speak out and talk about what changes we want to see for a more sustainable financial sector. So I'll flick ahead. So what does this really mean for carbon accounting? And, you know, this is building on the view, I think it was 84% that we said earlier. So for us, it's 99%, you know, because we are that digital bank is in scope 3. That's a huge challenge for us. It's so difficult to get an understanding of exactly where those emissions lie. And that's the great work we're doing with Normative to try and dig into exactly where we can improve. But if we can't see it, we can't do anything about it, right? And if we don't collectively go after that 99%, that's scope 3 for us, but also in all of your businesses, of course, if we don't collectively go after those Scope 3 emissions, then we don't have any chance of meeting our 2015 Paris goals. So the expert guidance that we get, and was referenced at the start of the call from Normative, is incredibly helpful in digging into all those different categories. We all know how challenging it is to understand what's going on in the Scope 3. We now know for every single supplier at ClearBank, what is that emissions impact, so that we can focus on the opportunities and the impacts within our value chain and go after them. A good example, we found a totally excessive emissions related to transporting technology around the country because we're largely a remote workforce. So we've been able to get onto that and save a fair few tons of carbon straight away, something we would never have noticed because the spend wasn't particularly high. And as I mentioned, we're going after our top 50 clients by emissions using that new feature that Sarah talks about. And that's already underway. So throughout the coming year, we hope to have emissions data across that top 50. And that will make up the lion's share of the Scope 3 emissions, depending on which suppliers come back to us, of course. So it's all about visibility. And one good example I would talk about would be Microsoft. I don't know if any of you are using Azure platform, but Microsoft are quite advanced in the granularity of emissions data they can provide. We've been looking at that internally because we're a Microsoft house, and we've been able to target changes to our infrastructure that haven't required huge, massive investments, but they have required investment. And we've avoided, I think, 120 tons of carbon per year already, and that accounts for about 4% of our emissions. So this visibility is so important. Microsoft are giving it to us. It's on us to try and give it to our clients and to demand it from our other suppliers. And thinking further about the innovation and the advocacy point, a project we're really proud to be a part of is Project Perseus. So there's 5.5 million small and medium-sized enterprises in the UK. And what Project Perseus is doing is, I think Normative are part of as well, it's essentially delivering emissions data sharing so that SMEs can really easily share their data with financial services and access green finance. And the example I'd give for this is it's very much like, if you remember 5 or 10 years ago, how poor internet digital banking was, and you had the little key card, you had to type things in, compared to what we have now with open banking and the amazing apps and the financial literacy and all that change. That same amount of change is what we want to see through Project Perseus. It's essentially the open banking for sharing emissions data and accessing green finance. So those are my key points. I think the one thing that I'd leave you with is some wise advice from an old veteran in the industry that I spoke to recently. And his guidance was that resilience is our ally in this area. As we drive the sustainability agenda in each of our organizations, we're going to get so many knockbacks, frustrations, steep learning curve, trying to understand what Scope 3 is, etc. So nurture your resiliency, and good luck.
Oliver, thank you so much. I feel like people who work in sustainability can be a little humble, but I think that your vision here is really, really inspiring. And I appreciate you coming to tell us that big idea. And we have one more segment today. We are very much on time. We have Dr. Alexander Schmidt, who is fresh back from COP, as he said, with the latest in legislation. So Alex, please take it away.
Thank you so much for the intro. Yeah, and I hope the back underneath my eyes, they don't show too much that we've just been through a week of COP, which just has closed actually yesterday. But more on that maybe in the Q&A if you're interested. I want to talk with you or to you quickly about legislation. And as we all know, and to set the scene for those who are unaware yet, legislation is really a critical success factor in the net zero transition. So we just heard about a practical example of companies or a company, embarking on this transition. And here's how legislation in 2023 evolved in terms of themes to support companies or to guide companies in this transition. So one of the major trends of 2023 that we've seen is, or the way I labeled it here, is legislation is going broad and deep, meaning across the globe, we see disclosure requirements increasing. Top of mind for most companies who have dialed in here probably is the CSRD. Even if you are not in the EU directly, there are and will be mandatory Scope 3 assessments for more than 50,000 companies that are either in the EU, so EU entities, or they make business in the EU, but might not even be headquartered in the EU. So it's important for almost all companies around the world. The UK has already a quite comprehensive framework, the SECR, but also there we see new developments with an upcoming sustainability disclosure requirements, the SDR, kind of an umbrella of all of these different requirements. And there is important to note that it's increasingly looking at greenwashing and how to avoid vague claims that we see on many products and advertisement. So we already seen the first few law cases or lawsuits based on these new anti-greenwashing laws. So very, very interesting what will be there decided in the upcoming year too. Last but not least, looking across the pond, also in the US, we've seen some quite rapid movements actually. So on the one hand, SEC on the national level is stalling a bit. So we have once more, just I think a week ago, got the news that the assignment of overall national requirements are going to be postponed. But in California, that's the surprising part, quite quickly the governor has signed into law a bill that will require more than 5,000 companies operating in California. So again, can also affect companies in the EU, for example, that are operating in California, to really comprehensively disclose their Scope 3 emission data, which has been unheard of so far in other jurisdictions. So that's a very, very important development in the US. Secondly, we have seen increasing consolidation, which is good news for everyone because it can be a bit of a wild, wild west out there, looking at different disclosure frameworks, etc. But we have seen the IFRS, so the International Financial Reporting Standards, taking on more and more of a leadership role, especially with its ISSB, so the International Sustainability Standards Board. They have released two first guidances, which is the IFRS S1 and S2. And they have also, with COP actually, taken over responsibilities of the previously separate entity, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. So we can only expect more and more convergence towards this body of the IFRS, and in that sense, probably also the same degree of scrutiny that is currently imposed on financial accounting, being imposed on carbon accounting as well. So let's stay tuned all for what is going to happen there in the future. Thirdly, and this remains an issue, we keep having bottlenecks around non-standards, so bottlenecks for companies, and these mostly emerge from non-standardized requirements and the lack of reliable data to actually follow through with both commitments, but also with reporting requirements. So what you see on the right-hand side here is just a snapshot, and you don't need to read any of this honestly, but you see a table here of the G20 and their respective disclosure standards or disclosure kind of status quo. And we see by the color scheme here that it's inherently not aligned. So we don't have clear, even in the G20, we don't have clearly aligned requirements or standards in place to comprehensively ask companies to disclose or to assess their environmental impact. So this keeps being a bottleneck. And again, during COP, we heard this from many companies. They do actually want more requirements. They do want to have a clearer guidance. And they also want to end with this confusion about what do I need to do in which jurisdiction. So that is a big issue, especially for large internationally operating organizations. So that was 2023. Let's have a quick look at what we see ahead of us in 2024. So the major themes I would love everyone to pay attention to, and we will surely follow up on with all of you in probably upcoming material, is one, of course, the decision on the US disclosure requirements. So this SEC standard that I was referring to earlier, which has now been deferred to probably somewhere around April 2024. So it's going to be interesting to see if the California bill will carry over, will have some momentum and effect on the overall US disclosure requirements. Secondly, companies in the EU, and we've heard also non-EU entities, they need to start collecting their data on emissions in the upcoming year, so pretty much 2 or 3 weeks from now, because the first reporting cycle will start in 2025 on financial year data from 2024. So it pretty much starts now. If you have no plan in place yet, well, you better get ready now because you need to have the data then available. We also heard that greenwashing is being cracked down increasingly. There will be fewer and fewer loopholes for greenwashing. And last but not least, and this is kind of the overarching message, everyone has to be aware and get ready for Scope 3 reporting requirements. I think Sarah put it very nicely before. You should get ready even if you're not required yet to mandatory disclosures, but the sooner you are prepared, or the sooner you get kind of your running shoes out of the closet, the sooner you will also be able to actually embark on this race, or on this journey. So with this quick outlook, I would hand back to Taylor and some Q&A, I think.
Thank you so much, Alex. I have the privilege of wrapping up a really, really excellent webinar today. Thank you for all of the opinions and perspectives that we heard from Jack and Oliver and Alex and Sarah. Just to wrap up, I am stealing this from Alex. This is his research, but this is a really profound fact that really sticks with me. We know, based on public commitments, 967 companies with public net zero commitments account for 78% of global industry emissions. And so what that means is not that we need more companies to commit to net zero. We just need to help these companies that have already committed fulfill their requirements. And I think you heard from Oliver that there are competitive reasons to do this. You heard from Jack that there are some limitations in terms of their experience and what the market looks like. You heard from Sarah that all these carbon accounting products have more innovation in order to really support these businesses. But if we can support these businesses, that's 78% of global industry emissions. And I think that is a really, really exciting, optimistic outlook. And we're going to do one more poll before we wrap up with some Q&A. So we started the webinar with a question around what you were working on in 2023. Now thinking ahead, what is your top of mind for your sustainability planning? And this was one where we knew there could be a huge variety of different outcomes. There could be a huge variety of things that are actually on your mind. Livestorm doesn't allow us a little write-in field, but if you want to throw something out into the chat, please do share in the chat. If we haven't captured something that's top of mind for you in the survey. And once again, the survey is in the bottom right. There's a little tab, polls, where you should be able to go and find the poll itself. And we will wait just a moment to see the results. And I'm super, super curious about any write-ins. Are there any write-ins? Transition planning. Thank you, Karen. And this one, interestingly, this one is quite spread. So I'm watching the results coming in. We have a very neck and neck race between incoming CSRD reporting requirements and then supply chain emissions and reduction. After that, we have net zero targets and SBTI. And then once again, it was the theme in 2023, but we have employee engagement and retention. So these surveys, we will definitely, we will post in our follow-ups. Really, really helpful and interesting information for us to use. And the consideration of planetary boundaries, super interesting, David. Thank you again for sharing. And this is the wrap up. I think we want to end with an empowering statement. It's never too early or too late to start carbon accounting. We know how big of an impact it can make. We actually have our next webinar coming up in January that's going to be about how you can turn around carbon accounting in time for 2024 reporting season. It is fast, but it can be done in a scientific and credible way. And we are here to support you. So if you want a demo of Normative, if you want to just talk more about Normative to anyone on our team, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are all here to answer questions and to tell you more about what we do. If it's not apparent from all the people on this webinar, we love sharing about what we do, and we love sharing about Normative. So that transitions us to Q&A. We got some great Q&As in the field. I would love to ask all of our participants on the webinar to please turn your cameras back on. Please don't unmute just yet, but we are going to redirect a few of these questions to certain people. I think the first one is for you, Alex, which is when a firm reports its supply chain emissions under Scope 3, how can it ensure that they are not double reporting Scope 1 and 2 emissions from their supplier?
The answer here is they cannot ensure that, and they shouldn't ensure that. So by design, the greenhouse gas protocol has this overlap, this double accounting. And I have encountered this multiple times. Companies are confused by this. But actually, you have to look at it. This is the incentive mechanism that we also need to drive emission reductions throughout your supply chain. Because ultimately, what this also means, if you double account if you account in your Scope 3 for your supplier Scope 1 and Scope 2, it also means you have a clear incentive to help them to reduce their Scope 1 and Scope 2. So again, Scope 1 and Scope 2 being pretty much emissions under their direct control. So double accounting is inherently baked into the greenhouse gas protocol design, and it sets the right incentives for companies to help decarbonize suppliers of theirs.
Thank you so much, Alex. The next one, I believe, is for Oliver. I think you're a great person to answer this one. But the question is, when undertaking carbon accountability to organizations, how do they balance this with overall sustainability objectives? We can't exclusively focus on carbon reduction, of course. There's other factors. How do we balance?
Yeah, this is such a great question. I'm really glad that it came up. So, and for us, when we talk about sustainability, it covers the traditional ESG, it covers social. It's much broader than just emissions. And I think this question is really about embedding in governance, and it's about what do you consider when you make a decision, because we're not saying when we look at Scope 3 or whatever it is, a carbon accounting, now all decisions must make this the number one priority. We're saying, let's introduce balance. Let's think about emissions alongside financial risk return, alongside social impact, alongside whatever other business decisions, and to think about a time horizon that's more than just 3 years, which is a bit more traditional. Look ahead to 10, 15, 20 years and think about what's coming up. There's a couple of good examples I could just think of is, for example, if you think about AI, you might say energy intensive, therefore bad. From the carbon accounting narrow lens, okay. But if you take a step back and look at the whole system, you could take, for example, some recent progress, which has been AI-based insurance guidance to very small farmers in developing countries. They can't afford to have an advisor. So they end up with a product that's really well suited to their needs and also comes with some real-time monitoring of their farms. And what happens is they end up with the right product. And it also means that they get paid out automatically because the AI and the monitoring means that they can tell the water levels or whatever it is, and they get insurance payment out straight away. So what that does is builds in resilience into the food chain, and it builds in environmental protection, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole series of impacts there where your AI is energy intensive and therefore bad, but you've got to balance that against the social impact or the environmental impact you're having. Another really good example is blockchain. Again, like we think about blockchain, we think, okay, Bitcoin has emissions greater than Spain. Blockchain must be bad. But while that's true, there is also huge potential around traceability of clean energy and traceability of carbon removals. So as carbon removals business grows, it's going to be so critical, as we've seen with the offsetting programs and all the bad press there. Blockchain is a great solution to increasing traceability there. So in summary, I would say that it's all about introducing balance into decision making where we don't have it today.
Awesome, Oliver. I want to kind of merge two questions. We got a few questions around CBAM, and Alex will correct my pronunciation of these legislations, CBAM and PACT. Could you talk a bit, Alex, about how current carbon accounting solutions can support those legislations?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a broader topic, so happy to come back on any specific questions later on in writing too. But in essence, both the CBAM, so the new kind of cross-border trading mechanism to account for emissions that are kind of in/exported, and the PACT initiative, they all focus on product level emissions data. So that is a field that is honestly right now not well developed yet. So we're still lacking comprehensive databases, comprehensive public repositories on product level emissions data. There are some industry specific ones that are available, but they are also only just developing. So both of these will set, so the PACT will set standards for how data is going to be exchanged on the product level. And the CBAM is already requiring companies to disclose such imported emissions from other suppliers and vendors. And Normative, of course, as we're always staying on top of developments in the industry, we will successfully support those standards as well as they become more widely available and as product level footprint data is becoming more and more kind of the standard and also scientifically sound and reliable.
Thank you so much, Alex. Let's do one more question. We are a bit over time, but I promised about 5-10 minutes of Q&A. And maybe Oliver and Alex can both respond to this one. You first, Oliver, but the question was, do you have some good tips on how to start working with Scope 3 emissions?
Yeah, so I mean, there's some great webinars and tools and to get a bit of an understanding of what Scope 3 is talking about. But I would say my main tip, well, 2 tips probably. Main tip is try and focus on materiality. So and great to work with an organization like Normative because you get the expert guidance at the same time. So you can quite quickly get an understanding of where is the materiality likely to be and start there. You don't need to boil the ocean, you need to do it all at once. You know, year one, try and start with the really material stuff. And a great place to start for us was around spend-based data. Gives a great initial indication of where to go. And the second one would be my tip from the end of the last one is to build your resiliency. Expect to be knocked back and just go on that learning curve because there aren't many people who really understand the detail on this. So you're going to be a pioneer basically by getting cracking with it.
Maybe just from my side to complete the picture, I totally support the view that we have to focus. At the same time, it's also important, and Oliver was touching upon this partly, to first get your comprehensive baseline measured. So really make sure you capture everything first, and then only you know where to zoom in on, where you really can start working with suppliers, where you get the most out of your investment. So comprehensive baseline setting, and then really focusing on your hotspots. And that's, as Oliver said, all quite straightforward if you have an expert vendor that helps you with that scalable solution.
Wonderful. I think that will be our last word of the day. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Jack. Wonderful presentations, a wealth of knowledge. I am super excited for 2024 and everything that we have in store, which starts with the normative webinar. So once again, Michelle shared the link in the chat. Please sign up if you're interested. And if you're still with us, don't forget you will be taken right after this to a survey that you can share a little bit of feedback for us on the quality of the webinar. It goes a long way. Thank you so much. If we didn't get to your question, you will get a follow-up via email from one of our climate experts. So please feel that every question will be responded to. Thank you everyone for attending. And that's it. Happy holidays. Thank you so much for coming and we'll see you next time.